I thought I knew betrayal. I thought I understood control. But when my husband forced me into bankruptcy court, claiming my company was worthless, I realized the truth. He had underestimated me. Every manipulation, every isolation tactic, every quiet attempt to break me only revealed the cracks in his own empire. Quietly, methodically, I traced his lies, exposed his schemes, and watched the walls he built collapse without raising my voice. In the end, I reclaimed my life, my company, and my power, proving that true victory doesn't come from anger or spectacle, it comes from patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. I used to believe silence was weakness. That the person who spoke the loudest won. But I learned the truth in a courtroom with ceilings too high and walls too cold. Silence terrifies the guilty. And on that morning my husband was very, very afraid. Even if he didn't show it yet. I remember the sound of my heels on the marble floor. Measured, steady, almost serene for someone walking into her own supposed ruin. But I wasn't ruined yet. I didn't even know how close I was. Case 47B. The clerk called out. Clara Walsh. Petition for bankruptcy. The words rolled through the room like a bad omen. People glanced up. Some with curiosity. Some with pity. Most looked right through me. Except one. The judge. He paused, squinting at the papers in front of him. Then at me. Then back to the papers. A slow recognition bloomed across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. That was the first moment I realized something in this story wasn't going to unfold the way my husband expected. But let me take you back. Because destruction never begins in the courtroom. It begins at home. Quietly. Softly. With trust. I met Daniel in San Francisco 7 years earlier. He had this calm confidence, the kind that makes you lean in without realizing you're moving. He smiled with one corner of his mouth half warm, half calculating. I didn't notice the calculation then. Or maybe I did, and I wanted the warmth badly enough to overlook the rest. He said he loved my ambition. He said it with his hand on my waist and a glass of Merlot in his fingers. And I believed him. Back then, my small company Clara Vista Analytics was just a seed. Fragile, uncertain, but full of potential. Daniel didn't just encourage me. He invested in my confidence. He cooked dinner when I worked late. He left coffee on my desk. He understood my drive in ways no one had before. Or maybe he just studied it. I later learned he studied everything about me, especially the things he needed to destroy me. My early success came quick. A state-level contract. A private client list that grew faster than I could track. And a reputation one I had fought tooth and bone for. Then, the shift. It started with small things. Misplaced documents. A vendor payment accidentally undone. A client meeting rescheduled to a slot I never approved. Moments tiny enough to ignore. If you trusted the person who said they were mistakes, I trusted him, and that trust was the first crack in the foundation. Daniel began taking more interest in my books. At first, it was supportive curiosity. Then it was constant monitoring. Then it was pressure. Let me help you manage the accounts, he said. You need to focus on scaling, he insisted. You're stressed, Clara, I can take this off your plate. His voice was steady, calm, convincing, the kind of tone a storm uses right before it breaks. Months passed before I realized he had taken access to everything. My finances, my business accounts, my vendor communications, even my tax filings, all under the guise of being helpful. And that's how control works. Not with a grab but with a gentle, soothing touch. I didn't know he was preparing the ground for my downfall. But someone else did. And that someone was the judge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in the courtroom, Daniel sat beside me, polished, composed, the loving husband helping his overwhelmed wife navigate a financial disaster. He placed his hand on mine. A gesture that looked tender to everyone watching. But his thumb pressed down with just enough pressure to remind me. He controlled the situation. Or so he believed. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried an edge I couldn't place. Mrs. Walsh. Clara Vista Analytics. That's your company? I nodded. He leaned back. And you're filing for bankruptcy? Another nod. The judge studied me, really studied me. And then he said words that sliced through the courtroom like a blade. I'm familiar with your company. And this case does not add up. Daniel stiffened beside me. I didn't breathe. That was the moment everything shifted. Not visibly, not loudly, but fate had taken one small step in my direction. This was the moment where the story truly begins. But to understand why the judge reacted that way, you need to understand exactly how Daniel tried to bury me. The morning the conflict truly began, California was unforgivingly bright, the kind of sunlight that exposes every flaw, every smudge on the window, every grain of dust. I remember standing in my office holding a vendor invoice that made no sense. The amount was wrong, the signature wasn't mine, and the payment had already been sent. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake. People make errors, systems glitch. But when I opened the account logs, the approval had come from my personal user ID. Except I hadn't logged in that day. My stomach tightened. I wasn't naive, I knew what unauthorized access looked like. But the idea that someone had used my credentials? That wasn't a simple mistake. The thought flashed across my mind like a shadow darting across a wall. Daniel has the login information. But I dismissed it. It felt too paranoid, too accusatory, too unloving. That was the exact problem. Love is the perfect blinder. I told myself it was an accounting error. But the truth was already circling me like a quiet predator. Later that afternoon, I confronted him softly. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. The kind that gives someone a chance to tell the truth. He was standing by the kitchen counter, casually scrolling through his phone, the picture of calm domesticity. When I mentioned the invoice, he didn't even look up. He just shrugged and said, "You've been under stress, Clara. You probably authorized it and forgot." His tone was light. But underneath, I heard it, the dismissal, the patronizing certainty. As if my mind were a fragile thing he had to interpret for me. Something inside me stung. But then he reached out, touched my shoulder and said, "You work too hard. Let me handle these things." I wanted to believe he meant well. But something in his eyes flickered, a coldness I had never noticed. Or maybe I had noticed it before, and learned to look away. That night, after he fell asleep, I checked the company accounts again. Another transfer, another odd signature, another approval under my name. 3 in total. Small amounts individually, tiny enough not to alert the bank. But together, a pattern. And patterns don't lie. I stared at the screen, the glow reflecting against the dark room. My pulse thudded. My breath grew shallow. Someone was siphoning money. Not enough to break me, not yet, but enough to destabilize operations. I sat back in my chair as the realization settled. This was intentional. I thought the danger was financial. I didn't realize the real danger was sleeping in the next room. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. Client emails went missing. Invoices were duplicated. A tax extension I had filed for never reached the IRS system. Every time I tried to fix something, another error appeared. It felt like stepping into quicksand. Every movement made me sink deeper. When I finally reached out to my accountant, she sounded concerned. "Clara, someone is accessing your financial portal from a different IP address." My throat tightened. When I asked for the IP, she read the numbers slowly. I felt a chill sweep over my skin. I recognized them. It was the IP address from my own house. Daniel's home office. That was the moment denial died. Not dramatically. Not with despair. Just a clean, surgical realization. My husband was sabotaging me. But the question wasn't why he was doing it. It was how far he planned to go. I tested him in small ways. Subtle mentions. Half-truths. Little baited lines of conversation. Each time, he reacted the same way, with impatience wrapped in gentleness, with concern that bordered on condescension. "You're overwhelmed," he kept saying. "You're not seeing clearly. You need to trust me." Trust. He used that word like a weapon. One evening, as I reviewed yet another suspicious transaction, he walked up behind me. His hand slid onto my shoulder. I flinched. Barely. But he noticed. His fingers paused, then tightened. Just slightly. Enough for my pulse to jump. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice soft but sharp underneath. "Nothing," I whispered. He leaned closer. Close enough that his breath brushed my neck. "Good," he murmured. "Because I need you calm. For both of us." It didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like instruction. That was when I realized something terrifying. He didn't think I was suspicious. He thought I was predictable. Over the next month, the tensions between us grew invisible teeth. Every conversation felt like a trap. Every silence felt calculated. I began documenting everything secretly, passwords changed, backups created, blind copies sent to a secure email he didn't know existed. But he was ahead of me. Always one step ahead. Until the night I discovered the folder on his computer. A folder named Estate Planning DW. Inside it, draft divorce papers, asset redistribution charts, my company valuation reports, and a spreadsheet titled Projected Bankruptcy Outcomes. I felt my knees weaken. My breath caught. My heartbeat roared in my ears. He wasn't sabotaging me. He was preparing to strip me of everything. Financially, professionally, legally. And he was waiting for the moment I would be too weak to fight back. The trembling hit me then. Not from fear, from clarity. He wanted me in court. He wanted me bankrupt. He wanted me defenseless. But he didn't know the judge already knew my name. And fate was about to start turning quietly in my favor. Tension is a quiet teacher. And it showed me something vital. Daniel wasn't done. He was just beginning. There is a kind of betrayal that announces itself loudly, storms, shouting, slammed doors. And then there is the other kind. The kind that comes quietly, like a draft under a locked door. You don't see it. You feel it. This chapter is where I began to feel it, not as a suspicion, but as a presence. A whisper behind my shoulder. A shift in the atmosphere of my own home. The days after discovering the folder on Daniel's computer didn't feel real. I moved through the house like an intruder in my own life. Pretending everything was normal. Pretending I hadn't seen my future written in spreadsheets. But fear isn't what grew inside me. Not anymore. It was something colder, sharper, like the early forming edge of resolve. Still, suspicion crept into everything. I caught him studying me more often, not lovingly, analytically. His eyes lingered on the way I held my phone, how long I typed, what screen I minimized when he walked into a room. One evening, he came to me with a glass of wine. "You're quiet lately," he said, handing it over. I forced a smile. "Just tired." He watched me take a sip before he took his own. His gaze didn't soften. It sharpened, studying my reaction. That was when I realized something chilling. He didn't trust me either. And people who don't trust you often have a reason. I thought I was hiding my suspicions. But maybe he was hiding something worse. The first true crack appeared 3 mornings later. I woke up to the sound of his voice in the hallway, hushed, urgent, almost panicked. He didn't realize I'd stepped out of the bedroom. "I told you, it's under control," he whispered sharply. "No. She has no idea. Because she doesn't pay attention. That's why." The words pierced me more than fear ever could. Not the content. The confidence. A quiet, familiar voice responded on the other end, too far away for me to hear clearly. But Daniel's tone changed when he answered. "Don't worry about the filings. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." My breath caught. Filings. Signatures. Documents. He was preparing something. And he truly believed that I was too distracted, too trusting, too naive to notice. He underestimated me. Again. He hung up when he heard my footsteps. His expression shifted instantly from sharp irritation to soft domestic warmth. The performance was seamless. "Morning, Clara," he said. "Did I wake you?" "No," I replied. But my eyes stayed on the phone in his hand. He placed it face down on the table. Face down. Always face down. I didn't say a word. And in that silence, unease curled around me like smoke. Over the next week, the symptoms of betrayal multiplied. He became increasingly organized. Too organized. He had folders where he never used to keep folders. He saved receipts, all of them with meticulous care. He checked the mail before I could. He checked the front door camera logs. He checked my schedule without asking. He checked my laptop once, thinking I didn't notice. I did. His fingers brushed the keyboard while I pretended to read on the couch. When I shifted, he snapped the lid closed gently, but too quickly. "Just checking if you closed everything," he murmured with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A lie wrapped in politeness. Every move he made carried the scent of someone preparing for a strike. I just didn't know when, or how. The first undeniable betrayal came on a fog-heavy morning. I logged into my company portal and found a notification. Financial account access changed. Authorized by DeWalsh. My pulse kicked. He'd done it. Not covertly. Not subtly. Blatantly, like he no longer felt the need to hide. He changed the access permissions on my own business account. That was the moment something in me hardened. I drove home too early and found him in his office. The door was half closed. His voice was firm, controlled. "I'm telling you, once the bankruptcy is filed, those assets transfer automatically." I froze. There it was. The word. The plan. The ambition behind every quiet manipulation. Bankruptcy. My bankruptcy. He wasn't sabotaging me for chaos. He was guiding me into legal ruin, so he could profit from the wreckage. I backed away before he noticed me. My suspicions were no longer shadows. They were facts, but betrayal doesn't exist in isolation. It spreads. And I was about to find the next thread, one that led to someone I once trusted. That afternoon, I called a former client, someone who had worked with Clara Vista for years. "Clara," her voice was gentle but guarded. "I'm glad you called. We assumed you'd shut down operations." "Shut down?" I repeated. "I haven't." She hesitated. "Daniel said you were stepping back. That you'd had a breakdown." My grip tightened around the phone. A breakdown? He told people I was unstable. He told them I was incapable. He told them I was no longer running my own company. And they believed him because he spoke calmly, softly, reasonably. People like Daniel always sound reasonable. I hung up and drove to the waterfront, the only place I could breathe. The ocean was gray, restless, full of secrets it refused to hide. I stood there, letting the cold wind cut through my composure. I thought marriage meant partnership. I thought love meant safety. I thought I knew the man I shared a home with. But betrayal reveals truth with a precision that honesty never could. The truth was simple. He wanted to erase me. Not physically, not violently, but legally, financially, professionally, completely. Somewhere between the crashing waves and the rising tide, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't warn him. I wouldn't cry. I would watch. I would gather evidence. I would let him believe he had already won. Because suspicion was no longer my weakness. It was my strategy. And that strategy would lead me to a discovery that changed everything. Something hidden in his emails that he never intended for me to see. Conflict doesn't always crash like a wave. Sometimes it seeps in like water between floorboards, slow, silent, destructive. This chapter is where the damage beneath the surface began to show. Not just in my company, but in me. The deeper I looked, the more I found. Every thread I pulled unraveled something larger. Something intentional. Something cruel. But the discovery that shattered me came on a night lit only by the glow of his monitor. It happened by accident or fate. Daniel left his laptop open, just long enough, before walking away to take a call. I should have ignored it. I should have let it sit there like a trap waiting to be sprung. But betrayal has a gravity of its own. It pulls you toward the truth, whether you're ready for it or not. The email thread was marked with a star. Important. Private. The subject line made my throat tighten. Clara Vista Financial Strategy, Phase 3. I clicked. Inside were 3 months of messages between Daniel and my assistant Jenna. My assistant. My right hand. The woman I mentored, trusted, trained. The first email was polite. Professional. A simple request for access to a vendor file. Nothing alarming. But the next one was a detailed list of tasks. Remove Clara from automatic approval notifications. Redirect payment alerts to Daniel's personal email. Forward all client complaints to a private inbox. Delete communication records after fulfilling his requests. Monitor Clara's login times and report anomalies. My fingers went cold. Then the final lines hit me like a blow. Once the filings begin, Clara can't know. Delay her responses. Schedule her out of her own meetings. We need her overwhelmed. Jenna replied with a single line. Understood. That was when I learned betrayal isn't a single act. It's a team effort. I leaned back in Daniel's chair, unable to breathe. The room around me blurred. My pulse throbbed behind my eyes. Jenna, someone I hired fresh out of business school, had been helping him dismantle everything I built. Why? Money? Fear? Loyalty? Or something else I hadn't uncovered yet? The why didn't matter. Not then. Not yet. What mattered was that I wasn't just being betrayed. I was being outmaneuvered. Systematically. Strategically. Coldly. After that night, I began seeing my house differently. Every room felt staged. Every glance from Daniel carried quiet calculation. Every silence felt like a test I didn't know I was failing. Sometimes he watched me over the rim of his coffee mug. Sometimes his hand lingered on my back a second longer than necessary. Sometimes he asked questions that sounded loving, but felt like probes. Did you sleep well? How's work going? Are you keeping up with invoices? Need me to double-check anything? Each question was a blade wrapped in gentle cloth. I answered every one with the same careful tone. Everything's fine. He smiled every time. Satisfied. Convinced. I was performing the role he expected me to play. Outside the house, things grew worse. 2 long-term clients paused contracts. A vendor threatened legal action for late payments I never approved. My tax preparer emailed saying she received a strange message supposedly from me requesting temporary redirection of correspondence. My stomach turned when I saw the attached signature. It was mine. But I didn't sign it. Someone traced it. Someone who had access to my files. Someone following instructions. The damage was no longer small. It was structural. And it was accelerating. One night, around midnight, Daniel climbed into bed beside me. He smelled faintly of cologne, one he only wore for important meetings. He slipped an arm around my waist. A tender gesture. A practiced one. But I froze. He felt it. "You're cold," he murmured. I wasn't cold. I was breaking. Because lying in the dark, with his arm draped over me, I realized I missed the man I thought he was. But that man never existed. I was grieving someone imaginary. Someone invented by hope and affection. Daniel wasn't deceiving me now. He'd been deceiving me for years. The betrayal didn't start with the finances. It started with a smile. An apology. A promise. A pattern. And I had loved him through all of it. My chest tightened. My eyes burned. But I didn't let a sound escape. Silence became my armor. 2 days later, I found what I needed not by searching for it but by recognizing a pattern. Daniel always printed documents before making a move. Always. So I checked the printer's hard drive. Most people don't know printers store previous scans and sent faxes. But I knew. He didn't think I would. On page 47 of the print log, I found it. A draft bankruptcy petition. Filed under my name. Signed. Dated. Prepared. Waiting only for submission. The signature was flawless. My handwriting perfect. My initials identical. Forged. Practiced. Polished. He'd been rehearsing my ruin. That was the moment heartbreak turned into something colder. Straighter. Sharpened like a blade left out in the winter air. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I went still. Completely still. Stillness is where clarity lives. And in that stillness, I saw the blueprint of his plan. He wanted me bankrupt. He wanted my company under his control. He wanted the judge to see me as careless, incompetent, unfit. He wanted to walk away with everything I built legally, cleanly, quietly. But fate had already chosen a side. He didn't know the judge knew my company's name. He didn't know the connections I'd made before he ever entered my life. He didn't know the quiet network of people who believed in me, not in him. And he certainly didn't know what I was capable of when cornered. The next step wasn't to confront him. It was to follow the trail he left behind. Straight to an unexpected ally who'd been watching longer than I realized. My name is Clara. And this is where the floor under my life stops being solid. The moment when suspicion stops being a shadow and becomes a shape with teeth. For weeks, I'd been cataloging my husband Daniel's strange behavior like a forensic scientist trapped inside my own home. Late-night texts he said were work-related, abrupt mood swings, sudden questions about my company's debts, and a strangely rehearsed sympathy whenever finances came up. It began on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that carries the weight of a judge's gavel, even when you don't know one is coming. The morning light in California had that washed-out, gold-toned, soft, forgiving. The kind of light that lies to you, promising you everything's okay. Daniel sat at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone with the speed of someone deleting things before you can see them. I pretended not to notice, because pretending is its own form of evidence. I poured myself coffee. He didn't look up. There was something feral beneath that silence. Something rehearsed. The first blow didn't land physically. It didn't need to. It came in the form of a letter. A thick envelope, cream paper, government seal, bankruptcy notice. My company's name printed at the top, filed by someone using my signature. For a second, the world narrowed into a pinhole. and all I could hear was my heartbeat slamming against my ribcage like it wanted out. I looked at Daniel. He blinked slowly, as if he'd been waiting for the sound of paper tearing open. My company was stable. Not rich, not struggling, just stable. No bankruptcy. No financial crisis. No reason for this letter to exist. But the letter didn't care about reasons. It cared about signatures. Signatures that looked like mine. Signatures that matched mine too closely. I felt the air leave my lungs. Daniel finally spoke. Not with concern. Not with shock. But with the tone of a man who had been practicing sympathy in the mirror. He placed a hand on my shoulder, slow and theatrical. He said he was so sorry this had to happen, as if he were giving a eulogy. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a crisis. It was a setup. The details unraveled with quiet brutality. Daniel had convinced one of my junior employees that I'd approved a restructuring, using vague memos and doctored emails. He had gained access to my business files by claiming I'd sent him to review them for tax season. He had been helping me with paperwork, not helping at all, but substituting documents behind my back. And worst of all, he had the audacity to act like he was trying to comfort me while the wreckage was still smoldering. I remember touching the edge of the envelope and feeling the slightest tremor in my fingers. Not fear. Recognition. Recognition of the fact that I had married someone who saw me not as a wife, but as a stepping stone. There's a certain look people have when they think they've finally trapped you. It's subtle, barely noticeable. A twitch at the corner of the mouth, a glimmer behind the eyes. A shallow breath held for 1 second too long. Daniel had that look. He asked if I needed help going over the next steps. That was when I realized his goal wasn't to comfort me. It was to watch me break. The quiet irony? I didn't break. Not then. Not ever again. I called my company's attorney. She sounded confused, then worried, then silent. Clara, this filing wasn't done by us. This wasn't authorized. And the date this was submitted on a day you were in a board meeting. There it was. Confirmation. The betrayal had fingerprints. Daniel's. My attorney asked to meet in person immediately. But I couldn't leave the house yet. Not until I finished watching Daniel. Not until he realized I wasn't the prey in this little tableau. So I sat down across from him at the kitchen island, placing the bankruptcy letter between us. He didn't pretend shock. Not anymore. He only asked, "So, what are you going to do now?" That line wasn't a question. It was a threat wrapped in curiosity. He wanted to see if I'd beg. He wanted to see if I'd fold. He wanted to see if I'd crumble into the version of me he'd spent months trying to weaken. I didn't give him any of that. I simply folded the letter back into its envelope, stood up, and told him I had a meeting. I didn't say with whom. I didn't say where. I didn't say why. But the flash of uncertainty in his eyes, that was the first crack in his confidence. As I grabbed my keys and stepped into the doorway, Daniel called out after me. Not loudly, almost casually, "Clara, just remember. Everything has consequences." I didn't turn around. Not even when I heard the second thing he said under his breath. Barely audible. Barely intended to be heard. "And you're already too late." There's a strange thing about betrayal. It doesn't hit all at once. People imagine it as a single explosion, loud, devastating. But in reality, it's a slow leak. A whisper of air leaving your lungs. A silence that stretches just a little too long. A moment where you look at someone you've loved and realize you don't recognize them anymore. I didn't collapse. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Not in a way that Daniel could feed on. Instead, the fallout arrived in quiet waves. The kind that drown you without making a sound. I don't remember turning the ignition. I only remember how the steering wheel vibrated beneath my palms, how the California sun was too bright, too sharp, and how the world felt slightly off-center, like someone had tilted the frame of my existence by a few degrees. Every traffic light felt longer. Every car horn felt louder. And the bankruptcy notice sat in the passenger seat like a ghost I didn't invite. My company. My employees. My years of work. Just gone? On paper, at least. But paper is a fragile weapon. And whoever forged my signature underestimated the woman who signed her first business deal at a coffee shop because she couldn't afford an office. I pulled into a quiet parking lot overlooking the coastline, one of those places where the ocean pretends it can wash pain away. It didn't. The moment I cut the engine, the silence inside the car closed around me like a vacuum. That's when the first real tear fell. Not a sob. Just one tear. A single drop of betrayal running down the side of my face. The ocean didn't help. The breeze didn't help. The sunlight didn't help. Because healing doesn't happen in beautiful places. It happens in broken ones. I placed my forehead against the steering wheel and let the truth stab its way through me. My husband had orchestrated a financial execution of everything I built, while sleeping in the same bed as me, kissing me goodnight, asking if I needed anything. Some people cheat with bodies. Daniel cheated with paperwork. The fallout hit me in waves. Shock, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. Heartbreak, realizing the person I trusted most had been studying me like a blueprint for destruction. Fear, wondering how far he'd planned to drag me down. Rage, cold, steady, growing beneath the grief. Resolve, the beginning of something sharper than pain. By the time I lifted my head, my tears had dried into a tighter expression. The kind people mistake for calm. It wasn't calm. It was the moment a wound becomes a scar. On that cliffside, staring at waves that didn't care about my suffering, I began dissecting my marriage like a crime scene. Because that's what it was. The subtle questions Daniel asked about my financial accounts. The sudden interest in my business struggles, even ones I hadn't voiced. The unexplained business trips that coincidentally aligned with paperwork filings. The temporary tenderness he showed only when he needed something from me. The way he started calling me absent-minded or overworked, as if rehearsing a narrative. He had been preparing my downfall long before I noticed the cracks. And the worst part? I had been loyal, faithful, supportive, blind. I felt stupid in that moment. But only for a moment. Because stupidity wasn't the thing that let Daniel deceive me. It was trust. A trust he weaponized. A trust he mistook for weakness. A trust that would become the very rope he'd later hang himself with. As I sat in my car, another memory surfaced, one that made my stomach twist. It was from a year earlier, the night my company landed its biggest client. Daniel had kissed my forehead and said, "Your success is our success." I remember smiling, feeling loved. Now, thinking back, I realized he had begun calculating me that very night. My revenue, my assets, my potential worth. Love isn't always replaced by hate. Sometimes it's replaced by clarity. The wind pushed against my car, rattling the door just enough to jolt me out of my spiraling thoughts. That's when the grief began to simmer down, and something else began to rise. Not screaming rage, not chaotic fury, nothing loud, just a slow, coiling anger like smoke curling beneath a door. Quiet, persistent, dangerous. He thought he'd taken everything from me. But he didn't know something crucial. I survive better angry than I ever did in love. And nothing is more dangerous than a woman who has been betrayed quietly. My phone buzzed. One text. From an unknown number. A message with only 4 words. "We need to talk." Judge M. Judge M. A bankruptcy judge. Recognizing my company's name. Reaching out to me. Directly. In that moment, everything in my chest tightened. Because sometimes the fallout isn't destruction. Sometimes it's the beginning of a trail leading straight into truth. Straight into danger. Straight into revenge. It begins with information. Asterisk, asterisk. This is the moment when my heartbreak stops bleeding. And begins sharpening itself. It doesn't happen in an instant. It's a transition. A shift in the air around me, subtle as a curtain being drawn. When Judge M's message blinked on my screen. "We need to talk." A weight settled in my chest that wasn't fear. It was certainty. Someone knew something. Someone had seen something. Someone recognized my name, my company, and the fraud embedded in the bankruptcy filing. And if a judge knew, Daniel was already in deeper danger than he realized. I drove straight to the courthouse. No appointment. No preparation. Just the message on my phone and a cold resolve that guided my hands on the steering wheel. The courthouse steps felt heavier than usual, like they carried the weight of 1,000 secrets. And maybe they did. Judge Mariana Miles, Judge M, met me in a private office, her expression thoughtful, almost guarded. She wasn't old, maybe mid-50s, but her eyes were the eyes of someone who had seen the inside of far too many lies. She didn't greet me with sympathy. She greeted me with suspicion. Not at me, but for me. She held the bankruptcy documents in her hand, my supposed signature at the bottom. She studied me for a long moment, then said, "Clara, I knew your father." Not a question. Not an introduction. A key. A door. A lock clicking open inside my memory. My father. A man whose company I built mine from. A man who died 5 years earlier. A man with a reputation for ruthless business integrity. Judge Miles wasn't just familiar with my company. She was familiar with my legacy. Everything inside me tightened. She explained everything in careful, measured words. She recognized my company's name because she had once handled a landmark case my father fought and won against corporate fraud. She remembered his principles. That integrity was non-negotiable, that signatures were sacred, that power was only meaningful if wielded responsibly. And when my bankruptcy filing crossed her desk, she noticed something off. She said my signature looked technically perfect. Perfect was the clue. Authentic signatures are never perfect. They wobble. They shift. They hold human error. This one was flawless. Too flawless. So she dug deeper. She checked timestamps, IP addresses, submission logs, and what she found made her jaw tighten. The filing was submitted from my home. At a time I was documented to be in a board meeting across the city. I felt the floor tilt under me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated destruction. When she finished, Judge Miles leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp as glass. "I can't intervene," she warned. "But I can tell you this filing is a fraud. And someone is trying very hard to cover their tracks." My heart echoed in the silence. A name in the logs ***. Judge Miles slid a single printed page across the desk. At first it looked like nothing. Just a log of digital access to the bankruptcy portal. But then, my eyes froze on a detail. An alternate login ID. A guest access account. Created 3 months ago. Used repeatedly in my company's name. Used during late-night hours. Used from familiar IP addresses. And listed under one recognizable username. D. Hartwell. Daniel. My husband. The man who kissed me goodbye while filing the paperwork to dismantle my life. A strange calm washed over me then. The kind that comes just after devastation. And just before strategy. Leaving the courthouse, the world felt different. Not softer, not safer, clearer. The ocean breeze outside didn't feel like comfort, it felt like perspective. Judge Miles couldn't intervene legally. But she had handed me something far more valuable than direct help. Proof. The beginning of a trail. A roadmap to Daniel's downfall. I walked to my car with a new sense of gravity in my steps. Grief was behind me now. Cold focus had taken its place. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't shake. I didn't panic. Because once you know the truth, fear loses its power. At home, I locked myself in my office. The one room Daniel rarely entered. I began digging. Banking records. Shared accounts. Credit card statements. Email backups. Cloud access logs. Document metadata. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Darkness filled the room. But the truth? The truth lit everything. Because hidden behind Daniel's forged signatures, behind his carefully timed messages, behind his feigned concern, I found something much worse. A file on his private cloud titled, Exit Strategy. Inside were spreadsheets, dates, timelines, financial projections, all of them modeled around one outcome: my company collapsing, me losing everything, and Daniel walking away with a pre-negotiated spousal compensation claim. One that gave him access to half my company's remaining assets. My stomach turned. But my mind sharpened. He wasn't just sabotaging me. He was positioning himself to profit from it. He didn't marry a wife. He married an opportunity. People imagine revenge as fire. Mine was ice. Silent. Precise. Unassuming until it cut through bone. I read through Daniel's exit strategy twice. Then a third time. Then slowly, deliberately. I made a folder of my own. I named it Countermeasure A. Inside, I began placing everything. Every fraudulent document, every forged signature, Judge Miles's confirmations, metadata, access logs, Daniel's financial modeling, his timeline, his plan, piece by piece, lie by lie, betrayal by betrayal. I built the thing that would destroy him. Not publicly, not loudly, but legally, irrefutably, irreversibly. By the time I finished, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was rebuilding. At 1:17 a.m., a floorboard creaked outside my office. Too soft to be coincidence. Too deliberate to be chance. Daniel's footsteps. He paused outside my office door. Silent. Listening. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I simply saved the last file, closed my laptop, and leaned back in the dark. He lingered another second, then walked away. But the message had already been delivered. Daniel knew something was shifting. He didn't know what yet. But he could feel the temperature change. It's precise. Asterisk asterisk. Revenge doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a whisper. My heart wasn't fractured anymore. It had crystallized. Sharp, reflective, and painfully clear. I didn't need rage. I needed strategy. And strategy thrives in silence. The night Daniel paused outside my office door was the moment I realized something crucial. He could sense the shift. But he had no idea where it was coming from. And that uncertainty? That was my advantage. I woke before dawn, my body still tuned to threat. My mind already calculating. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that hides tension in the walls. Daniel sat at the dining table pretending to read emails. But his eyes flicked to me too fast. Too often. He was watching me. Measuring me. Trying to decipher what I knew. And what I didn't. He had no idea I had his entire blueprint in my possession. So I gave him nothing. I poured coffee. Sat across from him. Flipped casually through my phone. And pretended to be the same unsuspecting wife he believed he'd weakened. But I wasn't her anymore. She died in the emotional fallout. I was someone new now. Someone he never planned for. The bank account trap asterisk asterisk. The first step of revenge is always small. A single stitch in a much larger pattern. I started by accessing my private business account, the one only my attorney and I used. Daniel didn't know the credentials for it. I transferred a portion of the emergency reserve into a legally protected status, a structure Daniel couldn't touch, subpoena, or claim marital interest in. Not much. Only enough to trigger one thing, a transaction alert that Daniel would see on the joint account dashboard. A breadcrumb. A carefully placed clue. When he checked our accounts, a habit I now knew he performed obsessively, he would see money moving in a direction he didn't anticipate. He would start wondering, is she preparing something? Does she know something? Did I miscalculate? Doubt is a powerful weapon, especially in the hands of someone who plans manipulations like stock trades. Right on schedule, Daniel saw the alert. He walked into the kitchen while I was reorganizing a cabinet, a meaningless task I performed with deliberate calm. He stood behind me a little too long before speaking. He asked why funds were moving. But he didn't ask like a husband. He asked like a man checking the pulse of his prey. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I didn't let him see a single crack. I simply said, just tying up loose ends. After the bankruptcy notice, I realized I shouldn't be careless. He froze. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But I could feel the shift in the air behind me. His breathing changed. A slow inhale. A tighter exhale. He knew I was becoming unpredictable. And unpredictability terrifies a manipulator. The attorney meeting he didn't expect asterisk asterisk. I arranged a meeting with my attorney, Amanda, but I didn't leave the house for it. We held it on a video call, with the blinds open. My voice low. My posture deliberately calm. Daniel watched me through the hallway mirror reflection, thinking I didn't see him. But I did. Every second of him watching fed into my plan. Amanda and I spoke in careful, coded phrases, protective measures, retraced documentation, verified signatures, preliminary findings, irregularities in the submission timeline. I watched the expression on Daniel's face shift from confident curiosity to subtle panic. He didn't know how much I knew, but he knew enough to fear it. After the call ended, I went to the garage, a space Daniel never cared about except when he needed tools. But he'd forgotten something. He stored old paperwork boxes in there years earlier, back when we moved. I sifted through them carefully, methodically. Bank statements, old contracts, house closing documents. Nothing interesting. Until I found a yellowing folder labeled Personal Tax Records 6 years ago. Inside, the folder was something that made my pulse stop. A signature comparison printout. My signature. His signature. Side by side. Practice sheets. Attempts. Trials. Corrections. Dozens of them. This wasn't just a recent plot. This wasn't something he devised overnight. He'd been practicing forging my signature. For years. Years. A slow, methodical study of my handwriting, my stroke weight, my pen pressure. This went deeper than revenge, deeper than malice. This was obsession. This was possession. This was long-term predation disguised as partnership. I sat on a crate and stared at the pages spread around me like a mosaic of betrayal. Suddenly everything made sense. The way he watched me sign checks. The way he asked me to initial here, here, and here. The way he insisted on handling minor paperwork. The way he always stood a little too close when I wrote anything. He wasn't admiring me. He was studying me. Learning me. Copying me. Preparing for a day like this. My stomach twisted. But my mind sharpened further. I gathered every forged attempt. Photographed them. Stamped them with date metadata. Filed them into countermeasure B. Then, I did something that marked the true turning point of this story. I placed the folder back exactly where it was. But 1 inch to the left. Just enough for him to notice it had been touched. Just enough for him to panic. Just enough for his next move to become rushed. Predictable. Sloppy. And sloppy men destroy themselves. The phone call at 11:09 p.m. ***. That night, as I sat on the edge of our bed documenting more evidence, my phone vibrated. A voicemail from Judge Miles. Her voice was strained, worried, urgent. "Clara, something new has come up regarding your case. Please call me first thing in the morning. And, be careful." Then the line clicked off. And from the hallway, barely visible in the dark, I saw Daniel's silhouette, standing perfectly still. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The night pressed its weight against the windows of the penthouse suite as I reviewed everything I'd collected so far. Screens glowed across the room, emails, spreadsheets, audio files, timestamps, all webs that properly woven, would lead straight to the heart of Daniel's empire. My empire, technically. One he had built on shadows, secrets, and the assumption that I would always be too quiet, too accommodating, too in love to question anything. He was about to learn that silence wasn't submission. Sometimes it was strategy. I leaned back in my chair, letting the soft hum of the city below ground me. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. The minor execution, the first little sting of uncertainty, the quiet shift of power beneath his feet. He felt it even if he pretended not to. The chilly politeness. The way he watched me now, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. The man was intuitive, yes. But not intuitive enough. Tonight marked the beginning of Phase 2. The escalation. And I had no intention of holding back. The restaurant was one of those dimly lit wood-paneled places where the price of the steak wasn't listed on the menu because it wasn't meant to be questioned. A place where deals were sealed with smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Daniel was already there when I arrived, surrounded by men who looked like they'd stepped out of a finance magazine spread. When he saw me approaching, something flickered, maybe curiosity, maybe calculation, maybe the faintest edge of unease. "Good." I greeted the investors warmly, shaking hands with the ease of someone who had spent years in these circles, even if unseen. Invisible didn't mean incapable. Overlooked didn't mean unskilled. As dinner unfolded, Daniel started his usual dance, boasting about upcoming expansions, courting their enthusiasm, subtly diminishing my contributions whenever he could. He always did it with finesse, a laugh here, a comment there, all disguised as humor. But tonight, I was ready. When the lead investor, Mr. Callahan, casually mentioned the rumored partnership with a major tech firm, Daniel playfully downplayed my involvement. "That was mostly my initiative," he said with a grin. "She provided some notes." I smiled slowly, took a sip of my wine, and placed my phone on the table screen down, recording the entire conversation. Not that he noticed. "That's interesting," I replied. "Because the proposal your team received has my signature on it. And the tech firm's CEO confirmed to me this morning that they're specifically moving forward because I negotiated the data sharing clause." "But you're right, Daniel. Just notes." The shift at the table was immediate, a subtle tightening of posture, a suppressed smirk from Callahan, a polite raise of eyebrows from his partner. Daniel's jaw flexed. "Of course," he said, but the words were thin. "We're a team. Everything is joint. And transparency is crucial," I added softly, holding his gaze. "Especially with investors." It wasn't a blow. Not yet. But it was a test, and he failed it beautifully. Later, when we stepped outside into the crisp night air, the facade cracked. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, looking around to make sure no one heard. I shrugged lightly. The truth? That wasn't your place. Wasn't my place? I repeated, eyebrows lifting. Daniel, I am the place. This company doesn't survive without my work. You know that. But you've been quite selective about what you let people see. His eyes narrowed. You've changed. The words were almost an accusation. No, I said. I've noticed. He didn't like that answer. Not even a little. He opened his mouth to argue, but then he stopped because for the first time he wasn't sure how this version of me would respond. Good. Let the uncertainty spread. When we reached home, he went straight to his office. He always retreated there when he felt threatened. Perfect. While he brooded behind a closed door, I sent a single email anonymous, routed through layers of encryption to the internal audit team. Nothing dramatic. Just one sentence. Review Executive Account 07 Blue for irregularities. Account 07 Blue was Daniel's personal project/fund, the one he thought I didn't know about. Money moving in ways it shouldn't. Partnerships recorded under shell names. Small inconsistencies that weren't damning alone but together. They painted the start of a financial storm. The audit team wouldn't act immediately. They would start quietly, discreetly, under the radar. They would gather questions, tug at threads, and sooner or later, those threads would lead straight to him. Phase 2 wasn't about destroying him. Not yet. Phase 2 was about pressure. The kind that seeped into walls, into spreadsheets, into text messages, into his sleep. The kind that made a confident man tremble just a little. I closed the laptop and exhaled. 2 days later, the ripple started. I walked into a meeting and felt it instantly, the shift in the air. The board members were polite, but they watched me differently. With interest, with curiosity, with respect. Someone had talked. Correction. Callahan had talked. Daniel noticed too. His expression tightened with every glance exchanged around the table. When I spoke, people leaned in. When he did, they listened, but not with the blind trust he was accustomed to. He hated it. Oh, he hated it. Good. This was the escalation. Not in noise, but in influence. Every test I set in front of him revealed something new. He was less composed than he pretended. Less informed than he claimed. Less secure than he wanted the world to believe. The cracks were forming. And I wasn't even done. That night, after everyone left the office, I saw it. Daniel standing alone in the dim boardroom, staring at the skyline with a clenched jaw. His reflection in the window looked like a man slowly realizing he was losing ground. He didn't hear me approach. What happened today? He whispered, almost to himself. Why is everything changing? Because I was done playing small. Because the truth was finally surfacing. Because this time, I wasn't flinching. But I didn't say any of that. I simply stepped back into the hallway and let him stew in his confusion. It was exactly where he needed to be. Tonight marked the end of the testing phase. Phase 3 was coming. And he had no idea what storm I was preparing. The city felt restless, that morning, gray sky, low clouds, the kind of hush that comes before something breaks. I woke up earlier than usual. A strange unease threading itself through my ribs, as though my instincts were trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. Daniel wasn't beside me. Not surprising. But the house felt off. Too quiet. Too still. As if holding its breath. I moved through the hallway, my steps soft against the wood flooring, listening. I could always tell what kind of day it would be based on the sounds: typing, clinking glass, phone calls already underway. But today? Nothing. Then I saw it. His home office door, usually shut, usually guarded like a vault, was cracked open. A thin line of warm light spilled across the floor. I approached slowly, carefully, as if nearing a sleeping predator. Inside, Daniel was standing over his desk, shoulders hunched, scrolling through something on his laptop with a focus so intense it devoured the room. His fingers trembled just slightly. Beside him lay 2 documents, both printed, both marked with red notes. He didn't notice me at first. Not until the floorboard creaked. He jolted, snapping the laptop shut as if I'd turned a flashlight on a criminal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, "How long have you been there?" he asked. "Long enough," I replied softly. His eyes flicked to the documents on the desk, too fast, too anxious. That reaction alone told me everything I needed to know. Whatever he was hiding was bigger than I expected. He moved to shuffle the papers away, but he wasn't fast enough, Not today. My gaze landed on the header of the first document. Preliminary Internal Audit Findings Executive Account 07 Blue. My chest tightened. They'd already begun. Faster than anticipated. And Daniel knew. His throat bobbed as he tried to maintain composure. It's nothing. Routine. Standard quarterly checks. I didn't say a word. I just watched him. He cracked first. Okay. Maybe not routine. His voice dipped. Some numbers didn't reconcile the way they should, that's all. And why is the audit team sending you flagged items directly? I asked. They usually notify the board first. His jaw tightened again, that tiny tick that appeared only when he was cornered. Because I asked them to. Why? Silence. Because he was scared. Because he was guilty. Because he was unraveling. He turned away, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to mask the tremor in his fingers. Everything in me sharpened. Whatever account 07 Blue contained, it wasn't minor wrongdoing. It wasn't a harmless slush fund. It wasn't a questionable accounting decision. It was something he feared enough to hide from the board, enough to lie about, enough to lose sleep over. But I wasn't ready for the real twist. Not yet. That would come seconds later. As he slipped the audits into a drawer, his phone left carelessly on the edge of the desk buzzed loudly. A name flashed across the screen. One I recognized instantly. A. Kessler. Kessler was a known consultant operating quietly in the gray areas of corporate finance, the type of man called upon only when illegal channels needed scrubbing clean. Daniel went rigid. He lunged for the phone, but I was closer and quicker. I picked it up. He froze. Give me that, he said, voice low. I met his gaze. Why is Kessler calling you at 6 in the morning? Because his voice cracked. It's complicated. That's not an answer. It's none of your business. It becomes my business when it threatens the company. His breathing began to quicken. His shoulders rose and fell. His eyes darted not with anger, but with panic. Then he whispered, with a hushed desperation I had never heard from him. He knows. They know. Who? He swallowed hard. The shell accounts. The transfers. The off-the-record partnerships. Everything. The world narrowed. My fingertips went cold. Not because he was involved in something shady, that much I suspected, but because of what he said next. Daniel exhaled shakily, lowering himself into his desk chair as if his bones could no longer hold him upright. I did it for you, he said. Everything I moved, every deal I hid, it was all to protect you. A beat of stunned silence. My heart hammered. Protect me from what? I asked. He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture frantic and uncollected. From your family. I blinked. My family? You really think they just faded out of your life on their own? You think your father stopped calling because of work? You think your mother's silence was her choice? My stomach dropped. What did you do? I paid them. The air punched out of my lungs. He continued, voice strained, cracking at the edges. I paid them to stay away. I paid them to cut contact. To give you space. To let you focus. You were so close to breaking when we met. You needed stability. You needed someone to handle the chaos. And they were chaos, so I took care of it. My vision swayed. My knees weakened. You bought my family's absence? He winced as if struck. I did it for you, he repeated. To give you peace. To build our life. To protect what we had. No. My voice was barely more than a whisper. You did it to isolate me. He flinched. You did it, I continued, to control me. Silence. He didn't deny it. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. And suddenly, everything, the condescension, the manipulation, the subtle digs in public, the tightly monitored accounts, the way he always made sure he was the center of my world, all of it snapped into place like a lock clicking shut. This wasn't just business corruption. This wasn't just ego. This was obsession, disguised as protection, wrapped in affection, delivered as devotion. A cage disguised as a marriage, and the man who built it finally admitted to the blueprints. The room tilted around me, not metaphorically, not dramatically, but physically. I had to grasp the edge of the desk to keep myself upright. Daniel reached a hesitant hand toward me. Please, he whispered. I'm handling it. Just trust me. I stepped back. His hand fell, and in that moment, this exact moment, I knew something with absolute clarity. I wasn't dismantling a corrupt husband, I was dismantling a man who never intended for me to leave him. Ever. The stakes had shifted. The game had sharpened. And the midpoint twist was no longer about money, or investors, or audits. It was about my freedom. Which meant the real battle was only just beginning. The day after Daniel confessed, the day after I learned he had paid my parents to disappear from my life, something in me crystallized. Alignment. A clean, cold, sharpened version of myself. My heartbeat slowed. My thoughts became structured. My voice, when I finally heard it, was steady enough to frighten even me. When people talk about snapping, they imagine chaos. But snapping, for me, felt like clarity. Daniel didn't notice it at first. Men like him rarely notice the moment their power stops working. But he felt something shift. A foreign pressure in the atmosphere of the house. A quietness that didn't belong to grief but to strategy. I left the house early that morning, long before sunrise, long before Daniel realized I wasn't asleep beside him. California pre-dawn light always feels like a secret. That morning, it felt like permission. I parked outside a small cafe, one that opened before the stock market did, and walked in wearing a coat heavy enough to hide my shaking hands. Not fear. Anticipation. Judge M was already inside, sitting in the corner, watching the door as if he'd been waiting for someone dangerous. When our eyes met, he stood not out of politeness, but because he recognized the woman walking toward him wasn't the same woman he'd texted days ago. I had changed. And he could see it. We sat. I didn't speak at first. Neither did he. Then he leaned forward and whispered the sentence that officially ignited the second half of my war. Your husband tried to rush your bankruptcy filing before the audit team traced the shell accounts. My pulse flicked like a match. He moved millions, the judge continued quietly. Then tried to bury the paperwork under your name. He expected you to go down with it. I didn't blink. Where is the audit now? I asked. Stalled. Temporarily. Why? He lowered his voice even more. Because someone inside the bank is covering for him. And someone else is feeding them information. I felt the room contract around me tight, suffocating. And you know who? I said. He nodded. A simple, devastating confirmation. I didn't need the name yet. Today was about execution. Positioning. The pivot point where everything that seemed fragile becomes lethal. When I returned home, Daniel was already awake. Standing in the kitchen. Wearing the same clothes from the night before. Eyes bloodshot from a night of pacing. The guilt he once weaponized now clung to him like humidity. Where were you? He asked. He was trying to sound gentle. Reassuring. Soft, but his voice cracked on the last word. I needed air, I answered. He nodded slowly as if afraid to push me. Good. He should be afraid. Even if he didn't yet understand why. He reached for my hand. I let him. Briefly. Just enough for him to think he still had me. Just enough for him to underestimate me. Then I pulled away lightly, softly, as if distracted rather than rejecting. I'm tired, I whispered. Of me? He asked. I didn't answer. And that silence was the first execution stroke. Silent pressure applied to the weakest point. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the kitchen with 1,000 unspoken fears. Every strategist knows the first true strike isn't physical, it's psychological. You attack the mind. You erode the confidence. You make your opponent question everything they relied on. That day, I became colder than I'd ever allowed myself to be. I simply went quiet. Quiet in the bedroom. Quiet at breakfast. Quiet in the hallway. Quiet when he checked my phone subtly and found nothing. Quiet when he watched me cancel meetings he didn't know I wasn't attending anyway. Quiet is a weapon. And Daniel, who thrived on control, felt it like a hand closing around his throat. By afternoon he cracked the first time. Clara, please talk to me. I can fix all this, I can explain, I just need you to trust me. Trust. The last currency he had with me. I said only 2 words. Work things out. Not we. Not us. Not together. Just him. Alone. His face twitched with panic. Good. At midnight, I executed the first actual tactical move. While Daniel slept fitfully, twisting, sweating, I slipped out of bed and went into the guest room. I opened my laptop and sent an email. A short one. 4 lines. To the audit chair. I need a confidential meeting. I have documents regarding account 07 Blue. Do not notify the CFO. CA. 30 seconds later. Understood. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Off-record location will follow. I closed the laptop slowly. Something inside me sparked the first real flicker of power. Not because I had proof yet, but because I had him. Pinned. Exposed. Cornered in shadows he thought were invisible. When I returned to bed, Daniel reached for me automatically. Half asleep. Seeking comfort from the very woman he'd tried to destroy. I let his hand rest on my arm for 2 seconds. Then I gently slid away. Just removed. The absence of warmth next to him made him stir. He rolled toward me. Eyes half open. Voice thick with fear. Don't leave me. The irony almost hurt. He clung to me now because he sensed something slipping. Not my love. His power over me. And that more than anything terrified him. I stared at him in the dim light. The man who isolated me from my family. The man who tried to burn down my company. The man who forged my bankruptcy. The man who paid for silence. The man who confessed obsession disguised as devotion. And I whispered not with anger, but with a stillness that tasted like vengeance. I'm not the one leaving. He frowned in confusion. But deep down, something in him understood. This was the turning point. The line drawn. The temperature shift in the house he thought he ruled. The power he assumed was permanent. Had finally changed hands. I turned my back to him. And the silence settled like a verdict. Before he fell back asleep barely, restlessly, trembling he whispered, Clara, what did you do? ***, one small move can start a chain reaction. And once the first domino falls, nothing stops the rest. ***, I woke that morning with a sense of inevitability. Not anxiety. Not anticipation. Not fear. I felt like a storm contained in human skin. A storm that had already been mapped, measured, and timed. Daniel didn't know it yet, but today, his world would begin to crumble. And I would watch. The location was discreet, a small, anonymous conference room in a law firm downtown. Judge M had suggested it as a secure place. I arrived early, documents in hand. The audit chair, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Miss Rivera, entered 5 minutes later. No assistants. No cameras. Only the people who needed to know and the papers that could destroy everything. I laid them out. Account 07 blue. All transfers meticulously documented. Forged signatures. Off-record shell accounts. Timestamps and IP addresses showing Daniel's movements during every suspicious transaction. The digital breadcrumbs leading back to him. Everything here, I said softly, was executed under your direction. Miss Rivera's eyes widened slightly. These are thorough. Almost surgical. And that was exactly the point. Everything had been prepared with precision, meticulous, cold, unyielding. Within hours, the effects began. Internal audit. The audit team started tracing shell accounts, uncovering not just mismanagement but intentional deception. Boardroom panic. Daniel received whispered questions from colleagues, investors who suddenly remembered anomalies in reports he had dismissed as trivial. Media pressure. Quiet. An internal tip reached the legal press, not explosive but suggestive enough to make other executives wary of signing off on his projects. Financial freeze. Banks began flagging unusual transactions for compliance review. Transactions Daniel assumed were invisible now had scrutiny. All of it moved invisibly, silently, like water creeping under doors. Daniel didn't notice the walls closing around him yet, but he could feel the air pressure change. And that was enough. When Daniel arrived home that evening, the house felt different. I wasn't waiting for him in anger. I wasn't pacing. I was seated at the dining table, documents organized, laptop closed, phone untouched. He froze the second he stepped inside. Something had shifted in the room's energy. Something he could feel, but couldn't yet name. Clara, he said cautiously, as if testing the floor to see if it would hold him. I didn't respond. Not yet. He lingered near the kitchen, pretending casual, pretending calm. You've done something, he said eventually, voice tight. Eyes darting to my side of the table. Hands twitching, as if unsure what to touch first. I looked at him evenly. Something? I asked. Or many somethings. A pause. A breath. And the first visible tremor of panic crossed his face. He tried to mask it. Failed. And he knew it. By midnight, the ripple became obvious. Daniel received emails flagged as urgent, confidential internal memos he couldn't ignore. Investors began calling, asking about transactions he had claimed were routine. The audit chair requested emergency documentation he couldn't fabricate in time. Even his trusted assistant hesitated to reply promptly, unsure of loyalty in the sudden storm. He paced. He cursed under his breath. He muttered threats to himself, anything to regain control. I observed silently, seated in the living room with a cup of tea. The power dynamic had shifted subtly but irrevocably. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Daniel's first real mistake was predictable. A reaction born of desperation. He attempted to override one of the flagged transactions himself, assuming the audit had missed a backdoor. But I had anticipated this move. I had already communicated digitally with Miss Rivera. Every action he took would be logged, time-stamped, and traced. By the time he initiated the override, it had already been blocked and a notification of the attempt had been sent to the board and the internal legal counsel. He froze, then laughed nervously, then slammed his hand against the desk. And there was no going back. I simply maintained composure. My silence became a weapon. Every hesitation he made, every second of uncertainty, strengthened my position. By the time he looked at me that night, eyes wild, jaw tight, he realized that he had no idea which move I would make next and that uncertainty was my leverage. He finally muttered, voice cracking under pressure, "Clara, what have you done?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because he already knew. He just didn't yet know the extent. He didn't know that the audit was a tip of the iceberg. He didn't know I had copies, backups, logs, everything. And with each second, it spread farther than he imagined. As I retreated to my office that night, Daniel stormed into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. A single thought repeated in his mind: she's not just fighting back, she's in control. ***, the most dangerous moment for a manipulator is when they realize they've lost control. And they've never faced the calm certainty of the one they tried to dominate. Daniel hadn't slept properly in 3 nights. He paced the apartment as if the walls themselves were pressing against him, watching him. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, echoed his fear back at him. I watched silently from the living room doorway, arms crossed, posture relaxed, eyes calm. He didn't see me until he stopped, mid-step, and realized I was there. Right there. Exactly where he didn't expect me. His face registered something primal: panic, confusion, and finally, a dawning understanding. "You've changed," he said finally, voice low, brittle. Not accusatory, not questioning, terrified. "Yes," I replied softly, calm. "I've changed. You forced me to." He swallowed. "You've gone too far," he said, trying to regain dominance. This is dangerous." I let a faint smile curve my lips. "Dangerous for you, maybe," I said. "For me? It's necessary." He took a step forward. Then stopped. His eyes flicked to my hands, empty, relaxed, controlled. No weapon. No threat. Just presence. And presence can destroy more than weapons ever could. I walked toward him slowly, deliberately, each step measured. "I know everything, Daniel," I said. "The accounts, the transfers, the shell corporations, the manipulations, the lies. The games you played to isolate me, to make me dependent, to make me silent." He shook his head, voice rising slightly. "You don't understand. I did it for us." "For us?" I echoed, voice calm, almost a whisper. "You did it to control me. You didn't love me, you owned me." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew I was right. Daniel's composure, long a shield against the world, began to fracture visibly. Hands shaking slightly. Eyes darting toward the phone, the documents, anything that might save him. Voice quivering. "Clara, I thought you'd never notice." I let him stew. Silence is heavier than accusation. It's sharper than any insult. It exposes weakness in a way words never could. Finally, he sank onto the couch, head in hands, a man who had commanded companies, investors, employees, markets, now reduced to trembling uncertainty. Exactly where I wanted him. I sat across from him, close enough for eye contact, far enough to remain untouchable. "You tried to isolate me from everyone I loved," I said softly. "You tried to control every transaction, every conversation, every step I took, and you underestimated me." He looked up, tears threatened, pride cracked. I did what I thought was right." "Right for who?" I asked. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The truth was too heavy for him to admit. You thought fear would keep me obedient. You thought silence would keep me loyal. You were wrong, I said, voice gaining quiet power. And in that moment, he realized that all the strategies, all the control, all the manipulation, none of it worked anymore. Daniel sat frozen, internal panic building. The audit was moving forward. Board members had questions. Investors were already whispering about irregularities. And I, the one he tried to weaken, was stronger, clearer, unassailable. He realized that his power had evaporated silently, without a fight, without a warning. I had dismantled his confidence without ever raising my voice. I had exposed his lies without confrontation in public. I had positioned myself above him without anger. And the collapse in front of me confirmed the cold truth. Fear is louder than anger, power is quieter than rage. And control is only real when wielded without theatrics. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I whispered, leaning slightly closer. You should be afraid of losing me. Because I won't be lost again. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Clara. I never meant. Doesn't matter. I interrupted, soft but sharp. It's over. The game you thought you were playing? It's mine now. Silence followed. Thick, heavy, absolute. And in that silence, I saw him understand the full scope of his mistakes. That manipulation, obsession, and control are fragile in the hands of someone who is patient, intelligent, and unwavering. Daniel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another flagged transaction. Another board inquiry. He looked at it, helpless, and whispered under his breath. How did you? The final twist isn't just about revelation. It's about who holds the pen when the story rewrites itself. The morning felt heavier than usual. Fog clung to the city streets, a gray veil hiding everything. I watched from the office window as cars moved like ants, unaware that a quiet revolution was already underway inside a single skyscraper. Daniel didn't know yet. He wouldn't see it coming until it struck. And when it did, the effect would be absolute. I walked into the conference room, calm, collected, documents secured in a leather folder. Judge M and the audit chair, Miss Rivera, were already there, expressions neutral but alert. We had coordinated every step. The final dominoes were lined. Daniel arrived last. Confident as ever, or so he thought. He carried his usual mask of charm and authority, but I could see the tremor in his hands. The world he had built was slipping, and he knew it. He just didn't know how fast. I opened the folder slowly, letting the weight of the papers pull the room into quiet anticipation. This, I said softly, is everything you've tried to hide. I laid out. Complete records of account 07 Blue transfers. Bank statements from shell corporations tracing back to his personal accounts. Emails, contracts, and encrypted messages confirming off-the-books partnerships. Evidence that his attempts to manipulate board members and investors were now fully documented and time-stamped. His eyes widened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw tightened so visibly it almost hurt to watch. The twist wasn't just that he had been caught. It was that I had orchestrated it all without a single misstep, all while remaining silent, unseen, and underestimated. I leaned forward slightly, letting my words land with precision. You thought you could control me. You thought paying my family, manipulating audits, isolating me, these would give you the upper hand. But the truth, the real truth is, your power depended on my silence. And I am no longer silent. Daniel's face shifted through stages. Confusion, panic, disbelief, desperation. He tried to protest, tried to justify, but Judge M raised a hand, silent but commanding. The final twist landed when I revealed a critical piece Daniel had never anticipated. During the previous weeks, I had not only exposed his manipulations to the audit team, the board, and Judge M, I had also ensured that all contracts, communications, and transactions were now legally in my name. Every deal he claimed was joint now reinforced my authority. His empire, his legacy was effectively tethered to me. And I could collapse it or command it at will. He froze. Every muscle in his body betrayed him. For the first time, Daniel realized that he no longer controlled anything. I did. I looked him squarely in the eyes. You tried to cage me with devotion, manipulation, and fear. I am leaving the cage behind. And you will witness it. He tried to speak, to plead, to manipulate, to bargain. Every word faltered in the shadow of evidence. Every threat sounded hollow. This was no longer a battle of words. This was a battle of power, and I had it. By noon, investors had been informed of the audit results and now viewed Daniel with skepticism. Board members were convening emergency sessions, questioning his authority and decisions. Banks froze his access to key accounts pending review. Legal counsel reviewed every shell account and transfer, confirming liability. Daniel had spent years building walls, hiding truths, manipulating perception. And within one morning, every wall collapsed. He was a king without a crown. A general without an army. A man who thought he controlled everything and controlled nothing. And I was the architect of it all. I simply walked through the empty boardroom, documents in hand, each step deliberate, measured. Each echo of my heels punctuated the silence that had replaced his hubris. Daniel watched. Staring, speechless, defeated. And the irony was exquisite. The man who had tried to bankrupt me, isolate me, and control me, the man who thought silence and fear were enough to bind me, was now powerless, undone, and entirely at my mercy. Sometimes, the quietest victory is the most devastating. Daniel slumped in his chair, defeated, barely recognizing the woman across from him. What will you do now? After the storm, you do not rebuild the same house. You build one designed to last. The morning after the final confrontation was quiet. No alarms, no frantic calls, no anxious footsteps. The city hummed in its usual indifferent rhythm, unaware of the earthquake that had shaken one skyscraper from its foundations. I moved through my apartment deliberately, observing small details, objects, furniture, the way sunlight hit the floor, and allowed myself a moment to absorb the calm. Power, I realized, is quiet before it is absolute. And right now, the quiet was mine. I sat at the large oak desk that had once symbolized collaboration but now symbolized control. The papers from Daniel's empire lay before me, organized, annotated, cross-referenced. Board members were now aligned with me. The audit reports had confirmed his mismanagement, legally and financially. Investors had been reassured, not by panic, but by my clarity and strategy. Legal counsel confirmed that every deal, contract, and partnership was secure under my authority. The empire he thought he controlled was now fully mine to steer. But this wasn't about ego or revenge anymore. It was about reclamation, order, strategy, legacy. Daniel lingered in the apartment, a shadow of the man he had once been. No confrontation. No pleading. No defiance. He had become a cautionary tale. A warning, a human domino toppled. And I allowed him to exist in that space, unthreatened but powerless. I didn't need vengeance anymore. I had certainty, and certainty is a far stronger weapon than rage. I walked past him without a word, noting the tension in his shoulders, the uncertainty in his gaze. A man who had tried to cage me now realized the cage no longer existed, and I could leave it open or close it forever. I chose calm, control, empowerment. The next days blurred into a careful orchestration. Emails were sent, approvals granted, transactions verified. Staff previously loyal to Daniel now acknowledged my authority without hesitation. Investor meetings were led by me, every word calculated to inspire confidence and reassurance. Financial stability, previously precarious under Daniel's deception, was now restored and transparent. I worked quietly, efficiently, strategically. No grand gestures. No public spectacle. Only results. Every decision reaffirmed. This empire was mine, built not on manipulation or fear but on intelligence, foresight, and execution. Outside the office, I began to reclaim other aspects of my life. I reconnected with family on my own terms. Friends previously kept at bay were welcomed back carefully. Personal freedom, long sacrificed, returned quietly but fully. And I realized that empowerment isn't loud. It's deliberate, controlled, and unwavering. Daniel remained a presence, but only as a reminder of how fragile arrogance can be. He was not destroyed, but he was neutralized. And sometimes, that is enough. I sat in my office one evening, sunlight fading into the horizon. The city lights blinked on like distant stars. I reflected on the irony. The man who tried to force me into bankruptcy almost destroyed everything I had built. He attempted to control me through isolation, fear, and manipulation. And yet, In trying to dominate me, he revealed exactly where his vulnerabilities lay. I simply existed in the quiet satisfaction of reclaimed agency, the kind that comes from foresight, patience, and strategic intelligence. I had rebuilt not just an empire, but myself. And that was a power no one could take away. That night, I locked the office door, stood in the empty room, and looked at the skyline. The empire was secure. My personal life was intact. The threats, the manipulation, the fear neutralized. But one thought lingered quietly, in the back of my mind. True power is measured not by what you've taken down, but by what you build afterward. If you had reclaimed everything someone tried to control, how would you rebuild your life differently? Share your thoughts below. The most profound ones are silent, deliberate, and inevitable. ***. The city had settled into evening calm. Lights blinked across the skyline, casting reflections into the office windows. I stood there, letting the quiet sink into my bones. Everything had shifted. The chaos Daniel once controlled had dissolved. The empire he manipulated now moved according to logic, strategy, and integrity. And I realized, the real victory wasn't in the collapse of his power, it was in the freedom I had reclaimed. I thought back to the early days, the subtle betrayals, the manipulations disguised as care, the quiet isolation, the fear I once carried like a second skin. At the time, I thought my strength would come from reaction, from confrontation, from fury. But strength, I discovered, comes from observation, patience, and precision, from knowing when to act and when to wait, from using silence as a weapon, strategy as armor, and intelligence as a shield. Daniel's downfall wasn't caused by rage. It was caused by clarity, by my refusal to be bound by fear, by the quiet decision to take control of my life and never relinquish it again. I learned several truths that I carried forward. Power is not inherited or given, it's claimed. Manipulation is fragile. The more a person depends on fear and isolation to control you, the easier they are to dismantle. Silence is a weapon. Calm, measured presence can shift the balance more than anger ever could. Agency is priceless. True victory lies not in defeating someone else but in reclaiming your own life and your own choices. Daniel's empire, once a cage, became my instrument. Not for revenge, not for domination, but for strategy, stability, and self-determination. I reconnected with my family, on my terms, slowly. Friends returned, cautiously but with trust restored. Business thrived not because of fear or manipulation but because of structure, intelligence, and transparency. I never needed to humiliate him publicly. I never needed spectacle. I simply let the dominoes fall, moved quietly, and waited for the inevitable. And in that waiting, I found peace. The moral is simple. Victory is quiet. Power is deliberate. And freedom is absolute when you refuse to relinquish it. I walked to the office window one last time that evening. The city stretched endlessly, lights twinkling like distant stars. I thought of the woman I had been, the one isolated, manipulated, and underestimated. And I smiled softly. Because she no longer existed. The woman who walked this path now was composed, precise, and unshakable. The world could move. People could plot. Fate could twist. But I had reclaimed my life. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. Have you ever had to reclaim control over your life quietly? Without spectacle. Share your story, and let others learn the power of patience and strategy. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, because this is what keeps the channel alive.